My father stood up during Thanksgiving dinner and told 20 relatives I owed my brother Marcus $142,500 for his company. My mother nodded like a judge. Everyone agrees. You have to write him this check. I laughed, but nobody cracked a smile. Marcus, the golden child, traced his wine glass. Dad leaned across the table. Considering the financial strain we endured by not putting you up for adoption, this is your moral obligation. The silence that followed wasn't shocked. It was expectant. 20 relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins who had just been passing the cranberry sauce and arguing about property taxes, all sat perfectly still, waiting for me to pull out a checkbook. Aunt Claire looked down at her plate. Uncle Duncan took a slow sip of his water, carefully avoiding my eyes. Nobody spoke up. Nobody defended me. They were all in on it. I looked at Marcus. He was 3 years older than me, wearing a pristine cashmere sweater that cost more than my first car. He didn't look desperate. He didn't look like a man whose business was allegedly on the brink of a massive expansion. He looked bored. He looked like a man waiting for a waitress to bring the bill so someone else could pay it. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the dining room floor. A harsh, ugly sound in the quiet room. I'm leaving, I said. My voice was quieter than I wanted it to be, thin and brittle. Dad didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Sit down. We aren't finished. I don't have $142,000, I said, my hands gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles burned. And even if I did, I wouldn't give it to Marcus for another one of his apps that goes nowhere. Mom sighed, the deep, suffering sigh she usually reserved for delayed flights or poor service at a restaurant. Don't be dramatic. We know about the CD that matured last month. We know about the savings. We've done the math. You can easily liquidate. Marcus is on the verge of a breakthrough, and you're hoarding cash out of spite. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. They had done the math. How did they know about the certificate of deposit? How did they know my exact savings balance? I had banked at the same local credit union since I was 16. Mom had helped me open the account when I got my first summer job. She must still have had her name on it as a joint custodian, an administrative detail I had entirely forgotten to sever when I turned 18. Not putting me up for adoption, I repeated, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. I looked at my father, really looked at the hard, unyielding lines of his face. That's how you view raising me? As a financial burden you chose not to unload? Dad picked up his fork, casually stabbing a piece of turkey. We made sacrifices. Now it's your turn. Marcus needs the capital by Tuesday to secure the commercial lease. You will wire the funds, or you will no longer be welcome in this house. I walked out. I didn't stop in the hallway to get my coat from the closet. I just walked out into the freezing November rain, got into my 10-year-old Honda, and drove until the heater finally kicked in, blowing stale, dusty air against my freezing hands. The phrase echoed in my head, over and over. Not putting you up for adoption. It explained everything. It explained why Marcus got private SAT tutors while I took on extra night shifts at a diner to pay for my own community college classes. It explained why Marcus's failures were learning experiences and my successes were lucky breaks. I hadn't been raised. I had been cultivated as a backup generator, kept in the basement until the primary power source failed. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone had 42 missed calls. Most were from Mom. A few were from Marcus. I ignored them all, booted up my laptop, and logged into my credit union account. My stomach dropped. The balance was still there, but there was a flashing red pending alert at the top of the dashboard. An external link had been established with a business checking account registered to Marcus's LLC. Someone had initiated a micro deposit verification process to allow unlimited outbound transfers. I called the bank's fraud department immediately. The representative, a woman named Nora, sounded sympathetic but firmly bureaucratic. The link request was initiated by a joint account holder, Nora explained over the phone. A verified user with equal permissions. Remove her, I said, my voice rising. Remove my mother right now. I can freeze the account to stop the pending link from finalizing, Nora said gently. But to permanently remove a joint owner, both parties must be present at a branch and sign a notarized release. I told her to freeze it. Every cent I had to my name, the emergency fund I had spent 8 years building, was suddenly locked in a vault I couldn't fully control. I sat on my cheap sofa in the dark, listening to the rain hit the windows, realizing how completely vulnerable I was. The next morning, I woke up to a long, voice-noted text from Marcus. I pressed play while staring at the ceiling. Look, Dad is having chest pains over this. His voice whined through the speaker, layered over the sound of an espresso machine. He was up half the night because you had to make a scene in front of Aunt Claire. It's just a bridge loan. I'll pay you back with interest once the Series A funding comes through. Just sign the guarantor paperwork Dana sends over today. Guarantor paperwork. I sat up, the lingering sleep vanishing instantly. Who was Dana? An hour later, an email dropped into my inbox from Dana Strand, a commercial real estate broker. The subject line read, "Welcome to the building. Lease guarantor disclosures for Marcus Tech Solutions." I opened the attachments with shaking hands. It was a standard, heavy-duty commercial lease for a massive, high-end office suite in the financial district. The monthly rent was astronomical. And right there, on page 12, was my name, my current address, my social security number, and my cell phone number, listed as the primary financial guarantor. I hadn't signed a single page, but the initial application had already been submitted and preliminarily approved based on my pristine credit history. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't call my parents. I called Silas Voss. Silas was a litigator who had briefly handled some minor estate issues when my uncle Elliot died 3 years ago. I only knew him because Elliot had been the one relative who actually liked me, the one who sneaked me crisp $20 bills at family gatherings and quietly told me my parents were idiots. Silas answered on the second ring. "I need a lawyer," I said, my voice cracking for the first time since the dinner. dinner. My family is trying to steal my identity to fund a commercial lease. Silas asked me to forward the email. I sent it, pacing my small living room while I waited. He went quiet on the line for a long time. The sound of him clicking through the heavy PDF document was the only noise in my apartment. They didn't just use your identity for the lease application, Silas said, his voice completely flat. They listed collateral to secure the landlord's approval. What collateral? I don't own property. All my cash is frozen in a credit union. They listed the medical settlement, Silas said. I stopped breathing. The apartment felt suddenly suffocating. The what? The payout from your car accident when you were 12. The insurance settlement. There was no payout, I said. My parents told me the hospital bills ate the entire thing. They told me I owed them for the physical therapy deductibles. There was nothing left. Silas sighed. It was a heavy, exhausted sound that aged him a decade over the phone. I need you to come to my office. Right now. There are things about your uncle's estate and your parents that you don't know. I drove to Silas's office in a daze, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands ached. The accident when I was 12 had shattered my femur and left me in traction for weeks. The physical therapy had taken a brutal, agonizing year. Every time I had cried from the pain, every time I had complained about the stretching exercises, my mother had reminded me of how much debt my carelessness in crossing the street had caused them. Silas's office was lined with dark wood and smelled intensely of old paper and coffee. He didn't offer me a drink. He just slid a thick, leather-bound ledger across his desk the moment I sat down. Uncle Elliot wasn't just a quiet man, Silas said, sitting heavily in his leather chair. He was meticulous. He kept an eye on your father's finances because he suspected your father was skimming from the broader family trust. What Elliot found was much worse. I opened the ledger. It was filled with neat, handwritten dates, account numbers, and wire transfer logs. When you were 12, Silas explained softly, watching my face, the insurance company paid out $68,000 for your pain and suffering. It was supposed to be placed in a protective trust until you turned 18. I ran my finger over the blue ink. The dates aligned perfectly with Marcus's freshman year of college. Where did it go? Your father forged a judicial release, claiming emergency medical necessity. He drained the trust within 6 months. The money went to Marcus's out-of-state tuition, his loft deposit in the city, and an early investment fund Marcus blew on a failed crypto startup. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. My pain, my shattered leg, my physical therapy. They had stolen it to buy Marcus's pride. Decades of guilt they had heaped on me, all while spending the money meant for my recovery. There's an addendum, Silas said, tapping a page near the back. Elliot documented it all. He left this ledger with me because he knew one day they would come for whatever you managed to build for yourself. He wanted you to have the weapon to destroy them when the time came. I looked up, a cold, hard knot forming in my chest. So we take this to the police. We press charges for fraud. Silas shook his head slowly, interlacing his fingers on the desk. It's not that simple anymore. Remember that lease application you got this morning? Yes, your father didn't just list the old settlement as collateral to look good. He listed a property, a commercial plaza, the same plaza Marcus is trying to lease space in. I don't own a plaza, I said, panic rising in my throat again. You do, Silas corrected. Uncle Elliot left you the majority shares in the holding company that owns that building. But your father has been secretly contesting the will in probate court for 2 years, keeping the transfer tied up. In the meantime, he forged your signature on a durable power of attorney to manage the property. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. He forged a POA, and he used it, Silas said, leaning forward. He didn't just approve Marcus's lease application as the landlord. He took out a massive line of credit against the equity of the building, under your name, to fund Marcus's startup. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out mechanically. It was a text from Marcus. Dad is on his way to the broker's office. Dana has the final paperwork ready. You need to unfreeze your credit union account and get down here by noon or the whole deal falls apart. Stop being selfish. I stared at the screen. The trap was already closed. They had built a mountain of debt in my name, and the only way to stop them from adding to it was to trigger an avalanche that would crush me first. How much? I asked Silas, my voice hollow and distant in my own ears. How much did he take out against the building? Silas looked at a printout on his desk. $800,000. And the bank issued the first tranche of the loan yesterday. $80,000. It's already gone into Marcus's vendor accounts. I closed my eyes. The $142,500 they had demanded at Thanksgiving wasn't an investment. It was just the cash they needed to cover the first round of interest payments and vendor shortfalls to keep the bank from looking too closely at the forged paperwork. They weren't just bleeding me. They were using me as a human shield for a massive financial crime. If we go to the police right now and claim fraud, Silas continued relentlessly, the bank will freeze the asset, your building. They will drag you into a civil suit to recover the $80,000 already spent. While the criminal case against your parents takes years to resolve, your credit will be destroyed. You will spend hundreds of thousands in legal fees defending yourself against the very loan your father took out in your name. So they win? I asked, looking at him. I have to just let them have it? No, Silas said. But you have to confront your father directly. You have to get him to withdraw the lease and the loan application himself, in writing, acknowledging the administrative error. Otherwise, the bank will hold you liable as the registered owner who failed to secure her own holding company. You have to corner him before he hands the final signed lease over to Dana Strand. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mom. We are at Dana's office. She is waiting for your initials on the disclosures. Come down now. Stop embarrassing us. I looked at the text, then at the shadow ledger on Silas's desk. The sheer, overwhelming audacity of it paralyzed me for a moment. They were sitting in a high-end real estate office, drinking complimentary sparkling water, waiting for me to arrive and sign away my financial life to cover their theft. I stood stood up. I didn't have a plan beyond walking into that room. I didn't know what I was going to say when I saw my father's face. I only knew that the 12-year-old girl who had cried through physical therapy while her mother called her a burden was finally dead. I drove downtown. The rain had turned into a thick, icy sleet that coated the windshield. Finding parking near the financial district took 20 minutes. Every minute that ticked by felt like sand pouring out of an hourglass. By the time I pushed through the heavy glass doors of Strand Commercial Realty, it was 11:45 a.m. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for the Marcus Tech Solutions signing," I said. "Oh yes, they're in the glass conference room at the end of the hall." I walked down the hallway. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the conference room, I could see them. Marcus was pacing near the window, talking animatedly on his phone, looking every bit the visionary CEO he pretended to be. Dad sat at the head of the long mahogany table, relaxed, his hands resting confidently on a stack of thick legal documents. Mom sat next to him, leafing through a magazine. Dana Strand, a sharp-looking woman in a tailored suit, was pointing something out on a page to Dad. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The conversation stopped. Dad looked up. His thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Finally," he said. "Have a seat. We have a lot to get through." I didn't sit. I stayed standing just inside the doorway, letting the heavy glass door swing shut behind me. It sealed with a quiet, expensive-sounding click. Dana Strand offered a professional, polished smile. She slid a thick stack of paper toward the empty chair. "We just need the guarantor to initial the disclosures, and we can finalize the transfer of keys." I flagged the signature lines in yellow. "I'm not signing anything," I said. Marcus rolled his eyes and let out a loud, exaggerated breath. "Are you kidding me? You're really going to do this now? You're going to throw a tantrum in front of Dana?" "It's not a tantrum, Marcus," I said, keeping my eyes on Dad. "It's a refusal." Dad leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms. He looked at me like I was a toddler refusing to put on my shoes. "Sit down. You are embarrassing yourself, and you are wasting Miss Strand's time. The bank has already approved the preliminary transfer. Your account is linked. This is a formality." "My account is frozen," I said. That made Mom look up from her magazine. The glossy pages slipped from her fingers. "What did you do?" "I froze it," I told her, my voice steadying. "And Nora at the credit union has flagged your joint access for fraud review. You can't touch my savings. You can't touch the CD." Dad's face darkened, the patronizing smile vanishing completely. He slammed his hand flat against the mahogany table. "Unfreeze it, right now. You have absolutely no idea what is at stake here. Marcus has vendor deadlines at the end of the week. Garrett, his lead investor, is flying in tomorrow to see the space. If you sabotage this—" "I didn't sabotage anything," I interrupted, reaching into my bag. I pulled out the manila envelope Silas had given me. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy slap right on top of Dana's flagged lease agreement. "You sabotaged yourselves when you forged my signature on a durable power of attorney." The room went dead silent. Dana Strand froze, her hand hovering over a silver pen. She looked from me to my father, the professional warmth draining from her face in an instant. "I don't know what you're talking about," Dad said, but his voice was suddenly tight. The effortless authority was gone. "I was at Silas Voss's office this morning," I said. "I saw Uncle Elliot's shadow ledger. I know about the $68,000 from my car accident. I know you drained my medical trust to pay for Marcus's tuition and his loft, but more importantly, Dad, I know about the building." Marcus frowned, looking genuinely confused. "What building?" "This building," I said, gesturing to the floor beneath us. "The one you're trying to lease space in. Uncle Elliot left the holding company to me, and Dad has been secretly contesting the will to keep it tied up, while using a forged POA to take out an $800,000 line of credit against my equity." Dana Strand stood up. She didn't say a word, but she pulled her stack of papers back across the table, gathering them against her chest like a shield. "Excuse me," she said to my father, her voice pure ice. "Did you list a contested asset as collateral for this lease?" "Dana, please. This is a family misunderstanding," Dad started, standing up quickly, reaching a hand out toward her. "My daughter is confused. She's been under a lot of stress." "I am not confused," I said. "And if you sign that lease, Miss Strand, you will be complicit in federal bank fraud." Dana backed away toward the door. "I need to speak with my broker in charge. We are pausing this transaction immediately." She slipped past me, practically running out of the conference room. The second the door clicked shut, Dad lunged across the table. He didn't reach for me, but he grabbed the manila envelope and ripped it open, scattering Silas's copies of the ledger and the POA over the polished wood. He stared at the documents, his face turning a mottled, dangerous red. Mom stood up, her voice shrill and trembling. "How could you do this to your brother? How could you be so utterly selfish? After everything we did for you, after we kept you and raised you, you come in here and ruin his life over some administrative oversight?" "Administrative oversight?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the glass walls. "You stole my pain. You watched me cry through physical therapy for a year, and you took the money meant to make me whole, and you bought him a loft. It was family money," Dad yelled, slamming his fist on the table again. "We are a family. You owed us for the burden of your care. You owed us." "I don't owe you anything," I said quietly. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at the forged POA document on the table, his mouth slightly open. For the first time in his life, the golden child realized the gold was stolen. He looked small. He looked pathetic. "Here is what's going to happen," I said, stepping closer to the table. "You are going to write an email to the commercial lender, right now, from your phone. You are going to tell them you are withdrawing the loan application due to an internal clerical error, and you are going to return the $80,000 you already took." "I can't return it." Marcus panicked, his voice cracking. "I already wired it to the hardware vendors. It's gone." "Then Dad better liquidate his retirement account," I said, looking right into my father's eyes. "Because if that line of credit isn't closed by 5 p.m. p.m. today, Silas Voss is taking this folder to the district attorney. You will be arrested for fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. They will put you in prison, Dad, and Marcus. When the police find out you accepted stolen funds to build your little startup, they'll name you as a co-conspirator. You wouldn't dare, Mom whispered, clutching her purse. You would never do that to your own family. Try me, I said. You have until 5 o'clock. I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. I walked past the receptionist, out the heavy glass doors, and into the freezing sleet. My legs were shaking so violently I had to lean against the brick wall of the building just to catch my breath. The adrenaline crash hit me like a physical blow, leaving me dizzy and nauseous. I stood there in the cold, pulling freezing air into my lungs, realizing that for the first time in my life, I was entirely alone. And it felt amazing. The implosion was swift and spectacular. Dad didn't have the cash to cover the $80,000. He had to take out a brutal, high-interest personal loan against their house to pay back the commercial lender before Silas's deadline. The bank, spooked by the sudden withdrawal, audited Marcus's LLC and immediately froze his remaining business accounts. Garrett, the lead investor, caught wind of the collapsed lease and pulled his funding entirely. Within 3 weeks, Marcus Tech Solutions was nothing but a pile of unpaid vendor invoices and a broken website. To avoid me going to the police with the forged POA, Dad quietly dropped his probate contest. A judge officially transferred the majority shares of the holding company to me. The commercial plaza, the very building they had tried to steal from me, was now mine. The day the deed cleared, Dad sent me a single email. You have destroyed your brother's future. You have broken your mother's heart. When you decide to respect this family again and apologize for what you've done, the door is open. Until then, you are dead to us. I printed that email. I bought a cheap frame from a craft store, put the email inside, and hung it on the wall of my new office. I moved my independent consulting business into the top floor of the plaza. It was a smaller suite than the one Marcus had tried to lease, but it had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city skyline. I spent my mornings drinking good coffee, reviewing tenant leases, and building my own life. I severed the joint account with my mother, moved my money to a new bank, and changed my phone number. For 6 months, it was quiet. It was peaceful. I thought it was over. Then, yesterday morning, my desk phone rang. It was Silas Voss. I need you to come down to the office, Silas said. His voice didn't have the calm, measured tone it usually did. It sounded strained. Finn, is it my dad? I asked, a familiar spike of anxiety hitting my chest. Did he try to file another suit? No, Silas said. I could hear him shuffling papers in the background. Your parents have been quiet. This is about Uncle Elliot. We were doing a final sweep of his safety deposit boxes before closing the estate entirely. I found something. Another ledger. I frowned, turning my chair to look out the window at the rain. I thought you gave me the ledger, the one with the settlement money. I did. But this is a second one. It was sealed inside a separate envelope, marked with instructions that it was only to be opened if you successfully claimed the plaza. Silas paused, and the silence stretched over the line for far too long. Your name is in it. Okay, doing what? Not as a victim, Silas said quietly. As a beneficiary. My stomach twisted. A beneficiary of what? Of a transaction you couldn't possibly have made, but your signature is on the release forms, verified by a notary I don't recognize. And the numbers, they dwarf what your father took from you. I need you here by noon. You need to see this before the ears does. He hung up before I could ask anything else. I sat in my office, staring at the framed email from my father. You are dead to us. I grabbed my coat and my keys. The drive to Silas's office felt entirely different this time. Before, I had been the victim of a simple, cruel family theft. Now, as I parked my car and walked into his dark wood-paneled waiting room, I felt like I was walking onto a minefield I didn't even know I owned. Silas's assistant, Petra, didn't even ask my name. She just looked at my face, nodded, and pointed to his closed door. Go right in. He's waiting. I opened the door. Silas was sitting at his desk, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. The desk was covered in old, yellowed bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and a small black notebook. He looked up at me. He didn't offer me a seat. Uncle Elliot hated your father, Silas said, skipping any greeting. He hated him for what he did to your settlement. He wanted to protect you. But I think Elliot's hatred made him do something incredibly reckless. Reckless how? I asked, stepping closer to the desk. Silas picked up a piece of paper. 2 years before he died, Elliot began systematically embezzling from the broader family trust, the trust your father and your aunts and uncles rely on for their dividends. He drained it, piece by piece, using ghost accounts in the Cayman Islands. I stared at him, trying to process the words. Elliot stole from the family? Yes, Silas said. He slid the piece of paper across the desk. It was a transfer authorization form, and he parked every single cent of it in an offshore holding shell, a shell company registered entirely in your name. I looked down at the paper. At the bottom, in blue ink, was my signature. It looked perfect, exactly the way I signed my name, but I had never seen this document in my life. How much? I whispered. Silas took a deep breath. $12 million. I backed away from the desk. No, I didn't sign that. I didn't know anything about that. Silas, you know I didn't do this. I believe you, Silas said, but the paper trail says you did. And 3 days ago, the family trust administrator filed a police report regarding the missing funds. They hired a forensic accountant. It's only a matter of time before they trace the ghost accounts to the shell company, which is in my name. Which is in your name, Silas confirmed. He rubbed his eyes, looking older than I had ever seen him. Your father didn't just hate you because he had to raise you. He hated you because he thought you were helping Elliot steal the family fortune. And now you are sitting on $12 million of stolen money, and the entire family is about to come looking for it. I sank into the chair opposite his desk, the leather grunting groaned under my weight. The room suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. Elliot, I said, the name catching in my throat. Elliot did this. Silas didn't try to soften the blow. He just nodded. He used your identity to build a vault, and he stuffed it with the family's dividends. I don't know if he planned to tell you, or if he thought he'd live long enough to move it again, but he died of a massive stroke at 64, and the money just sat there, accruing interest. In your name. I stared at the transfer authorization form, the perfect blue ink. The betrayal hit harder than my father's theft ever could. My father had never pretended to love me. Elliot had. He was the one who bought me milkshakes after my physical therapy sessions, the one who patted my shoulder and told me I was smarter than Marcus. And all the while, he had been practicing my signature so he could use me as a human shield for his embezzlement. Who knows? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The trust administrator, Owen Brennan, Silas said, pulling a thin gray folder from the pile. He initiated a 10-year audit last month. He hired an independent forensic accountant, Miriam Kellner. Miriam found the Cayman Shell Company yesterday. She immediately notified Owen, and Owen notified the family. I finished, a cold dread washing over me. Right on cue, my phone started vibrating in my coat pocket. It wasn't a single text. It was a continuous, frantic buzzing. I pulled it out. 17 missed calls, group texts, voicemails, Aunt Claire, Uncle Duncan, Cousin Vivian. People who hadn't spoken a single word in my defense at Thanksgiving were suddenly blowing up my phone. I tapped on the first voicemail. It was Aunt Claire. I put it on speaker and set the phone on Silas's desk. We know what you did. Claire's voice crackled through the small speaker, sharp and trembling with rage. Owen just sent the board the preliminary audit. $12 million. You and Elliot stole from your own family. Your father told us you were vicious. But this? You let Marcus go bankrupt while you were sitting on our money? We are filing a civil injunction today. Don't even think about running. I ended the playback. The silence in Silas's office was deafening. They think I knew, I said. They think I've been sitting on a fortune this whole time. It makes perfect sense to them, Silas pointed out pragmatically. It explains why you fought so hard for the commercial plaza. It explains why you wouldn't give Marcus the $140,000. In their minds, you're the mastermind who manipulated an old man into stealing their inheritance. So how do we prove I did? We have to get ahead of the injunction, Silas said, leaning forward. If Owen and the family file a motion to freeze your assets pending an investigation, they won't just lock up the Cayman accounts. They will freeze the commercial plaza. You won't be able to collect rent. You won't be able to pay the building's taxes. You'll lose the property before we even get to court. We need a handwriting expert, I said, pointing at the forged transfer form. I already called one, but we also need to meet with Miriam Kellner. Directly, we hand over the first ledger, the one proving your father stole your settlement, to establish a pattern of family members forging your signature. We show her you are a victim of financial abuse, not the perpetrator of it. I stood up, grabbing my coat. My hands were shaking again, but the initial shock was already hardening into a cold, focused anger. Set the meeting. I'm going back to the office to pull my own bank records. I want every single legitimate transaction I've ever made ready for her to review. I drove back to the plaza in the pouring rain. The windshield wipers beat a frantic rhythm. My phone didn't stop buzzing on the passenger seat. I finally turned it on silent and flipped it face down. When I pulled into my reserved parking spot in the underground garage, I felt a tiny fraction of control return. This was my building. I had fought for it. I had bled for it. I wasn't going to let Uncle Elliot's ghost or my father's greed take it away from me. I took the private elevator up to the top floor. The doors slid open to my reception area. The control vanished instantly. Sitting on the sleek leather sofa in my waiting room, her designer raincoat draped neatly over her lap, was my mother. She didn't look angry. She looked utterly devastated, which was infinitely more dangerous. She stood up as I stepped out of the elevator. "How could you?" she whispered. Her voice broke perfectly on the last syllable. "How did you get up here?" I asked, my voice flat. "This floor requires a keycard. I rode up with one of the cleaning staff," she said dismissively, taking a step toward me. "Don't change the subject. Your father is at the hospital. He thought he was having a heart attack when Owen called him with the audit results. I didn't steal the trust money, Mom. Elliot forged my signature." She let out a wet, bitter laugh. "Always the victim. Always someone else's fault. You watched your brother beg for a bridge loan. You watched his company collapse. You let your father take out a second mortgage on our home to pay back that commercial lender. And the whole time, you had $12 million of our family's money sitting in an offshore account. I didn't know about the account," I said, stepping closer to her, lowering my voice. "And even if I did, why would I give a dime of it to the people who stole my settlement money?" Mom's expression hardened, the devastation melting away to reveal the cold, calculating woman underneath. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope, heavily taped and stamped with a legal seal. She slapped it against my chest. I reflexively caught it before it hit the floor. "What is this?" I asked. "It's a summons," she said softly. "The Family Trust Board voted an hour ago. We are suing you for the return of the $12 million, plus punitive damages for the collapse of Marcus's business. And we filed an emergency lien against this building." She turned and pressed the call button for the elevator. "You thought you won because you got this concrete box," she said, looking at the glowing numbers above the doors. "But you overplayed your hand. By Friday, you won't even have a bus pass." The elevator arrived with a soft ping. She stepped inside, the doors sliding shut, leaving me standing alone in my lobby, holding a lawsuit that could strip me of absolutely everything. I sank into the chair opposite his desk. The leather groaned under my weight. The room suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. "Elliot," I said, the name catching in my throat. "Elliot did this." Silas didn't try to soften the blow. He just nodded. "He used your identity to build a vault, and he stuffed it with the family's dividends. I don't know if he planned to to tell you, or if he thought he'd live long enough to move it again. But he died of a massive stroke at 64, and the money just sat there, accruing interest, in your name. I stared at the transfer authorization form. The perfect blue ink. The betrayal hit harder than my father's theft ever could. My father had never pretended to love me. Elliot had. He was the one who bought me milkshakes after my physical therapy sessions. The one who patted my shoulder and told me I was smarter than Marcus. And all the while, he had been practicing my signature so he could use me as a human shield for his embezzlement. Who knows? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The trust administrator, Owen Brennan, Silas said, pulling a thin gray folder from the pile. He initiated a 10-year audit last month. He hired an independent forensic accountant, Miriam Kellner. Miriam found the Cayman Shell Company yesterday. She immediately notified Owen, and Owen notified the family. I finished, a cold dread washing over me. Right on cue, my phone started vibrating in my coat pocket. It wasn't a single text. It was a continuous, frantic buzzing. I pulled it out. 17 missed calls, group texts, voicemails, Aunt Claire, Uncle Duncan, Cousin Vivian. People who hadn't spoken a single word in my defense at Thanksgiving were suddenly blowing up my phone. I tapped on the first voicemail. It was Aunt Claire. I put it on speaker and set the phone on Silas's desk. We know what you did. Claire's voice crackled through the small speaker, sharp and trembling with rage. Owen just sent the board the preliminary audit. $12 million. You and Elliot stole from your own family. Your father told us you were vicious, but this, you let Marcus go bankrupt while you were sitting on our money? We are filing a civil injunction today. Don't even think about running. I ended the playback. The silence in Silas's office was deafening. They think I knew, I said. They think I've been sitting on a fortune this whole time. It makes perfect sense to them, Silas pointed out pragmatically. It explains why you fought so hard for the commercial plaza. It explains why you wouldn't give Marcus the $140 grand. In their minds, you're the mastermind who manipulated an old man into stealing their inheritance. So how do we prove I didn't? We have to get ahead of the injunction, Silas said, leaning forward. If Owen and the family file a motion to freeze your assets pending an investigation, they won't just lock up the Cayman accounts. They will freeze the commercial plaza. You won't be able to collect rent. You won't be able to pay the building's taxes. You'll lose the property before we even get to court. We need a handwriting expert, I said, pointing at the forged transfer form. I already called one, but we also need to meet with Miriam Kellner. Directly, we hand over the first ledger, the one proving your father stole your settlement, to establish a pattern of family members forging your signature. We show her you are a victim of financial abuse, not the perpetrator of it. I stood up, grabbing my coat. My hands were shaking again, but the initial shock was already hardening into a cold, focused anger. Set the meeting. I'm going back to the office to pull my own bank records. I want every single legitimate transaction I've ever made ready for her to review. I drove back to the plaza in the pouring rain. The windshield wipers beat a frantic rhythm. My phone didn't stop buzzing on the passenger seat. I finally turned it on silent and flipped it face down. When I pulled into my reserve parking spot in the underground garage, I felt a tiny fraction of control return. This was my building. I had fought for it. I had bled for it. I wasn't going to let Uncle Elliot's ghost or my father's greed take it away from me. I took the private elevator up to the top floor. The doors slid open to my reception area. The control vanished instantly. Sitting on the sleek leather sofa in my waiting room, her designer raincoat draped neatly over her lap, was my mother. She didn't look angry. She looked utterly devastated, which was infinitely more dangerous. She stood up as I stepped out of the elevator. How could you? She whispered. Her voice broke perfectly on the last syllable. How did you get up here? I asked, my voice flat. This floor requires a key card. I rode up with one of the cleaning staff, she said dismissively, taking a step toward me. Don't change the subject. Your father is at the hospital. He thought he was having a heart attack when Owen called him with the audit results. I didn't steal the trust money, Mom. Elliot forged my signature. She let out a wet, bitter laugh. Always the victim. Always someone else's fault. You watched your brother beg for a bridge loan. You watched his company collapse. You let your father take out a second mortgage on our home to pay back that commercial lender. And the whole time, you had $12 million of our family's money sitting in an offshore account. I didn't know about the account, I said, stepping closer to her, lowering my voice. And even if I did, why would I give a dime of it to the people who stole my settlement money? Mom's expression hardened, the devastation melting away to reveal the cold, calculating woman underneath. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope, heavily taped and stamped with a legal seal. She slapped it against my chest. I reflexively caught it before it hit the floor. What is this? I asked. It's a summons, she said softly. The Family Trust Board voted an hour ago. We are suing you for the return of the $12 million, plus punitive damages for the collapse of Marcus's business. And we filed an emergency lien against this building. She turned and pressed the call button for the elevator. You thought you won because you got this concrete box, she said, looking at the glowing numbers above the doors. But you overplayed your hand. By Friday, you won't even have a bus pass. The elevator arrived with a soft ping. She stepped inside, the doors sliding shut, leaving me standing alone in my lobby, holding a lawsuit that could strip me of absolutely everything. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed elevator doors. The manila envelope in my hands felt like it was radioactive. I didn't open it in the lobby. I walked back into my office, sat down at my desk, and used a letter opener to slice through the heavy tape. It was 50 pages of legalese. The plaintiff was the broader family trust, represented by Owen Brennan. I skimmed past the standard definitions and jumped straight to the preliminary injunctions. Mom wasn't exaggerating. They had petitioned a judge for an emergency ex parte freeze on every asset I owned. They argued I was a massive flight risk because of the Cayman Islands Shell Company. The judge had signed it. I picked up my my desk phone and dialed Silas. He answered on the first ring. My mother just hand-delivered a summons, I said. They got an emergency lien. Silas cursed. It was a sharp, ugly word that didn't fit his dark wood office. She bypassed the process server to rub it in your face. Did you read the injunction? I'm looking at it now. Log into your business banking portal, Silas ordered. Right now. I pulled up the web browser, typed in my credentials, and hit enter. The screen loaded. My checking account, the operating account for the plaza, the reserve fund for building repairs, all of them had the same red banner across the top. Account restricted per court order. Please contact your branch. Frozen, I said. My mouth was dry. All of it. Owen moved faster than I thought, Silas said, the sound of keyboard clacking coming through the line. He must have had this drafted the second Miriam Kellner found the shell company. They want to choke you out before you can mount a defense. You can't pay your litigator if you can't access your cash. They want you to default. I have payroll on Friday, I said, panic finally bleeding into my voice. I have cleaning staff, security, utilities. If I don't pay the building's operational costs, the tenants can break their leases. That's exactly what your family is banking on. They want the plaza to hemorrhage value, so you're forced to surrender it to them in a settlement. A sharp knock on my office door made me jump. I looked up. Standing in the glass frame of my doorway was Ellis Tate. Ellis ran a mid-sized corporate law firm on the 3rd floor. He was one of my most reliable tenants, the kind of guy who paid rent 3 days early and never complained about the fact. He was holding his iPad. He didn't look happy. Hold on, Silas, I said, putting the phone on mute. Come in, Ellis. What's wrong? Ellis walked in and placed the iPad on my desk. I just got a very strange email from a man named Owen Brennan. He claims to represent an entity called the Elliott Trust, and he attached a court order instructing all tenants in this building to route their monthly rent into a court-appointed escrow account. My stomach hit the floor. They weren't just freezing what I had. They were cutting off the oxygen. Ellis, I can explain, I started, but he held up a hand. I'm a corporate litigator, Ellis said flatly. I read the attachment. It's an active injunction regarding contested ownership and stolen funds. Now I like you. You've been a hell of a lot better to deal with than the previous management company. But I cannot have my firm caught in the middle of a federal embezzlement dispute. My partners are already nervous. It's a family dispute, I said, fighting to keep my voice completely level. My uncle used my identity to open an account I didn't know about. My family is trying to use it to seize this property. It's a fraudulent claim, and my lawyer is contesting the injunction tomorrow. Ellis looked at me for a long, calculating moment. If I pay into their escrow, and you win, I have to deal with the headache of retrieving it to pay you. If I pay you, and they win, I'm in violation of a court order. Hold your rent, I told him. Put it in your own firm's escrow account for now. Don't send it to Owen. Just give me 48 hours to get the lien lifted. Ellis tapped the edge of the iPad. 48 hours. Then I have to follow the court order to protect my firm. And I'm going to tell the other tenants on my floor to do the same. You need to get ahead of this, or you're going to have a panicked building by tomorrow morning. He picked up his tablet and walked out. I took the phone off mute. They're emailing my tenants. Owen sent the injunction to the entire rent roll. Of course he did, Silas said. His voice was grim. It's a textbook squeeze out. We have to kill the root of this, and we have to do it fast. I got Miriam Kellner to agree to a meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., at my office. I told her we have proof of prior identity theft regarding your uncle's estate. Will she listen? She's an independent forensic accountant, Silas said. She doesn't care about your family drama. She only cares about the paper trail, which means she's going to ask you for access. Total access. She's going to want to mirror your laptop, your phone, and your personal servers to check for any digital connection to the Cayman shell. She can have it. I have nothing to hide. Good. Bring every device you've used in the last 3 years. But you need to know something else. Owen is going to be there. I rubbed my temples, a vicious headache blooming behind my eyes. Why? Because he's the client who hired her. He insisted on being present for any evidentiary handover. And I guarantee you, he's going to bring someone from the family to rattle you. Let them come, I said. I don't care anymore. I hung up and spent the next 3 hours drafting a calm, professional email to every tenant in the building, assuring them that the notice from Owen Brennan was the result of a baseless, retaliatory legal filing, and that all operations would continue normally. It felt like a massive lie, considering I couldn't even buy a cup of coffee with my business card right now. But I hit send anyway. When I finally left the office, the rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and freezing. I drove back to my apartment in silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the tires on the wet asphalt. My personal checking account was at a different bank than my business accounts, one I had opened specifically to distance myself from my mother. I stopped at an ATM on the way home, just to check the balance. The screen flashed green. Available balance, $14,200. It was my personal emergency fund. It wasn't frozen yet. I withdrew $500 in cash, just in case. The crisp 20s felt thick and heavy in my pocket. I spent the evening gathering my devices. My current laptop, an old tablet I used for reading, and the backup hard drive I used for my consulting business. I packed them all into a waterproof messenger bag and set it by the door. At 10:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. This is Conrad, Owen's paralegal. I'm not supposed to reach out to you, but I think you should know what you're walking into tomorrow. I stared at the screen. I didn't know a Conrad. I didn't reply. Engaging with opposing counsel's staff was a massive risk. It could be a trap to claim I was tampering with their investigation. A minute later, a second text came through. Your uncle didn't just forge your signature on the authorization form. Miriam found the security questionnaire for the Cayman account recovery. The security questions were things only you would know. The street you grew up on, your first pet's name, and the date of your car accident. They don't just think you signed the paper. They think think you set up the digital locks. I dropped the phone on the kitchen counter. Elliot had known all of those things. Of course he had. He was family. He was the one who visited me in the hospital after the accident. He had used the most traumatic day of my childhood as a password to lock away stolen money. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, watching the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the wall. The $12 million wasn't just sitting in an account. It was guarded by my memories. The next morning, I arrived at Silas's office at 8:45 a.m. The messenger bag with my electronics felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Petra gave me a tight, sympathetic smile as I walked in. She pointed to the large conference room down the hall. "They're already in there," she said softly. I pushed open the heavy oak door. Silas was sitting at the head of the table. To his right sat a woman with sharp, observant eyes and graying hair pulled into a tight bun. She had a thick stack of printed spreadsheets in front of her. That had to be Miriam Kellner. Opposite her sat Owen Brennan. He was a man in his late 50s, wearing a suit that looked too expensive for his salary, radiating a smug, bureaucratic authority. And sitting right next to him was Marcus. Marcus looked terrible. The pristine cashmere sweaters were gone. He wore a slightly wrinkled button-down, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who had lost everything and was desperate to find someone to blame. When he saw me, his jaw tightened, but he didn't say a word. "Have a seat," Silas said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. I sat down and placed the messenger bag on the table. Miriam Kellner folded her hands over her spreadsheets. She didn't look angry or hostile. She just looked intensely focused. "Thank you for coming. I understand this is a highly contentious situation, but my role is strictly objective. I trace the funds. I verify the authorizations. Nothing more." "Then let's look at the authorizations," Silas said smoothly. He slid a copy of Uncle Elliot's first shadow ledger across the table to her. "My client is here voluntarily because we want to establish a documented history of familial fraud and identity theft. Specifically, her father forging legal documents to steal her medical settlement to fund her brother's expenses." Owen Brennan scoffed loudly. "This is a distraction tactic. What happened 10 years ago with a minor settlement has nothing to do with $12 million of stolen trust dividends. It establishes pattern and practice." Silas shot back. "It proves that the people around her had no issue hijacking her financial identity." Miriam opened the ledger. She spent a long time looking at the entries. I watched her eyes track the dates, the amounts, the notes in Elliot's neat handwriting. Then, she slowly closed the book. "This is compelling evidence of a separate crime," Miriam said, her voice perfectly even. "And it certainly paints a picture of a dysfunctional financial environment. But it doesn't explain the Cayman shell." She reached into her own folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She slid it toward me. It wasn't the signature authorization Silas had shown me yesterday. It was a printout of an IP access log. "The shell company's online portal was accessed exactly 4 times in the last 3 years," Miriam said. "Once to set up the account, and 3 times to check the balance." I looked at the log. It listed dates, timestamps, and IP addresses. "I've never accessed it," I said, looking her right in the eye. "I brought all my devices. You can mirror them. You can check the MAC addresses against this log. You won't find a match." Marcus leaned forward, a nasty, bitter smile spreading across his face. "Of course she brought her devices. She's had 3 days to wipe them since the audit started. Or she used a burner." "I didn't use a burner, Marcus," I said coldly. Miriam held up a hand, silencing. "I don't need to mirror your devices right now, because I already traced the IP addresses on this log." She pointed a manicured finger at the first 3 lines. "The initial setup and the first 2 logins originated from a secure, private network registered to your late Uncle Elliot's primary residence. That supports your theory that he was the architect of the account." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "So he did it." "Yes," Miriam said, but her face didn't relax. She moved her finger to the final line on the log. "The date was exactly 6 weeks ago, long after Uncle Elliot died, long after the estate was settled. But this final login," Miriam said softly, the silence in the room suddenly suffocating. "This login happened 6 weeks ago. Someone logged into the offshore portal, bypassed the security questions, and viewed the $12 million balance." She pushed the paper a millimeter closer to me. "And the IP address for this login," she continued, "is registered to the private Wi-Fi network in your apartment." The room spun. I stared at the string of numbers on the page. It was my home IP. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Is it?" Owen Brennan asked, leaning back in his chair with a triumphant smirk. "Or did you just get curious about your stolen fortune and make a sloppy mistake?" "I didn't do it," I said, my voice rising. I looked at Silas. He was staring at the IP log, his jaw clenched so tight the muscle jumped in his cheek. 6 weeks ago," Marcus said, almost enjoying the sound of his own voice. 6 weeks ago was exactly when I asked you for the bridge loan. You went home, logged into your secret little vault, looked at $12 million, and decided to let my company die anyway. Someone spoofed the IP," Silas said quickly, turning to Miriam. "Or someone accessed her physical network. Someone would need her Wi-Fi password," Miriam corrected. "And they would need the answers to the security questions. Her street, her pet, the date of her accident." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I thought about the text from Conrad last night. I thought about the timeline. 6 weeks ago, I was at the Thanksgiving dinner. I had left the dinner early. I had gone home, checked my credit union account, and found it frozen by my mother. But I hadn't gone straight home. I had driven around for an hour in the rain, trying to calm down. When I got back to my apartment, I had 42 missed calls, most from Mom, a few from Marcus. "Who has the keys to your apartment?" Silas asked me, his voice tight and urgent. "No one," I said. "Just me." And I stopped. The memory hit me like a physical blow. When I first moved into the apartment 3 years ago, my mother had insisted on taking a spare key for emergencies. I had completely completely forgotten about it. I hadn't changed the locks. I looked across the table at Marcus. He was watching me. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked incredibly still. Marcus, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Where did you go when I walked out of Thanksgiving dinner? Marcus blinked. The triumphant smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. What are you talking about? I stayed at the table. We all did. Did you? I asked. Because Mom had her phone out all night. She was calling me. She knew exactly how much was in my savings. But when I left, you went quiet. You didn't leave a voice note until the next morning. This is ridiculous, Owen interrupted. You're trying to shift the blame. I'm trying to figure out who was inside my apartment while I was driving around in the rain, I said, ignoring Owen entirely. I kept my eyes locked on Marcus. You had Mom's spare key. You knew my Wi-Fi password because you set up my router when I moved in, and you definitely knew the date of my car accident. Marcus's hands twitched on the table. He quickly pulled them into his lap. You're insane. Why would I log into an account I didn't even know existed? Because you were desperate, Silas said, catching on instantly. His lawyer instincts flared to life, his voice sharp and interrogative. You needed cash. You were digging for anything you could find. Maybe Elliot left a physical clue, a notebook, a scrap of paper with a URL and the security questions hidden somewhere in the family archives, and you found it. I didn't find anything. Marcus snapped, his voice pitching up. If you logged into that account, Marcus, Miriam said, turning her sharp gaze onto him, and you used her home network to do it, that leaves a digital footprint on the router itself, a device handshake. We can subpoena the router's internal logs and match the MAC address to your laptop or phone. Marcus turned pale. The exact same shade of pale he had turned in the glass conference room when I told him the lease was dead. He looked at Owen. Then he looked at the IP log on the table. I just wanted to see if it was real, Marcus blurted out. The words hung in the air, pathetic and damning. Owen Brennan froze. Marcus, shut up. I found a piece of paper in Elliot's old desk months ago. Marcus yelled, his composure completely shattering. It had a login and the answers to her security questions. I thought it was a joke, but when she wouldn't give me the money for the lease, I went to her place to see if she had a checkbook or something I could use to secure the loan. I connected to the Wi-Fi. I typed in the URL from the paper, and it was there. $12 million. He looked at me, his eyes wide and panicked. You had $12 million, and you were letting me drown. I didn't have it, I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any sympathy. Elliot put it there. And you just admitted to breaking into my home, accessing a stolen financial vault, and trying to frame me for it. Silas didn't miss a beat. He looked directly at Miriam Kellner. You wanted the truth, Miriam. You just got it on the record. My client never accessed the shell company. Her brother did. Miriam slowly picked up her pen. She wrote something down on her notepad, her expression unreadable. This complicates the timeline significantly. It proves unauthorized third-party access. It proves she's innocent. Silas corrected firmly. He turned to Owen Brennan. You filed an emergency injunction based on an IP log you assumed belonged to her. Your own witness just confessed to spoofing her location to commit cyber intrusion. If you don't drop the lien on her building by noon today, I am filing a countersuit for malicious prosecution, and I'm handing Marcus's confession directly to the FBI for wire fraud. Owen looked like he had swallowed glass. He glared at Marcus with utter disgust. I need to confer with the trust board. You have until noon, Silas said, standing up. The meeting was over. I grabbed my messenger bag and walked out. I didn't look at Marcus. I didn't care what happened to him anymore. I made it to the elevator before Silas caught up to me. That was lucky, Silas said quietly, pressing the call button. If he had kept his mouth shut, we would have had to fight a months-long subpoena battle for the router logs. It wasn't luck, I said. It's Marcus. He can't handle pressure. He always folds when you push him. The elevator doors opened. We stepped inside, so the lien gets dropped, I said, watching the floor numbers descend. I get my building back. Most likely, yes, Silas nodded. Owen is a pragmatist. He won't risk federal exposure for a faulty injunction. The family will have to pursue the Cayman funds through Elliot's estate, not you. I let out a long, exhausted breath. The heavy weight that had been sitting on my chest since yesterday finally began to lift. I had my plaza. I had my cash flow. I was free of them. The elevator reached the lobby. I walked out into the crisp, cold air. The rain had cleared out, leaving the sky a brilliant, blinding blue. I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at it. It wasn't Mom. It wasn't Marcus. It wasn't Silas. It was a notification from my personal, unfrozen checking account, the one with the $14,200 emergency fund. Alert, an incoming wire transfer has cleared. I frowned. I wasn't expecting any payments. My consulting invoices didn't process until the end of the month. I picked up the phone, unlocked it, and opened the banking app. The screen loaded. I stared at the balance. It didn't say $14,200 anymore. It said $12,014,200. I stopped breathing. I stared at the numbers until they burned into my retinas. Below the massive balance was a single transaction line, an incoming international wire from the Cayman Islands Shell Company. It had bypassed the frozen accounts entirely and dumped straight into my personal bank. And right in the memo line, attached to the wire, was a short string of text. Transfer initiated by verified user. Security protocol cleared. Someone had moved the money. They had moved all of it, right into my lap. And they had done it while Marcus was sitting in the conference room with me. I stared at the screen for a full minute, the engine of my Honda idling in the cold parking garage. I didn't call the bank's fraud department. I didn't panic. I tapped the screen, took a screenshot of the cleared wire, and dialed Silas. He answered immediately, his voice tense. Did Owen try to stop you in the lobby? No, I said, staring blindly through my windshield. Silas, the $12 million just landed in my personal checking account. A long, heavy silence stretched over the line. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside his office office window. Say that again, he finally whispered. It cleared, I told him. While we were sitting in that room, the money moved from the Cayman shell directly into my local, unfrozen account. The memo line says a verified user cleared the security protocol. Silas didn't speak for a long time. I could hear the rapid clicking of his keyboard. It wasn't a user, he said softly, the realization dawning on him. It was a trigger, an automated escrow release. Triggered by what? By the plaza, Silas said, his voice gaining speed and clarity. Elliot didn't just leave you the holding company. He tied the Cayman shell to the deed. The moment a judge officially stamped the transfer of the building into your name, it started a 30-day countdown. When your father dropped his probate contest a month ago, he didn't just surrender the building. He unlocked the vault. I leaned my head back against the headrest. The sheer, terrifying brilliance of it washed over me. Uncle Elliot knew they would try to take the building. He knew I would have to fight them for it. He used the plaza as a test. If I was strong enough to rip the property from my father's hands, I was strong enough to handle the family fortune. Owen's injunction is useless, Silas continued, a dark amusement creeping into his tone. He filed an emergency freeze on your business accounts and the Cayman shell. But the Cayman shell is empty now, and your personal account wasn't named in the lien. The money is liquid. It's completely yours. It's stolen trust money, I reminded him. Legally, it's a gray area that would take a decade to litigate, Silas corrected. But practically, you hold all the cards. Owen has an empty trust, a blown injunction, and a witness who just confessed to cyber intrusion. What do you want to do? I looked down at the $12 million glowing on my phone screen. For 30 years, my family had made me feel small. They had tallied every cent I cost them. They had expected me to bleed myself dry to keep Marcus afloat. Call Owen, I said. My voice was steady. Tell him I want him, my father, and my mother in my office at the plaza at 3 o'clock today. Tell him if they aren't there, I'm sending Marcus's confession to the FBI, and I'm wiring the $12 million to a non-extradition account by 4. I'll draft the paperwork, Silas said. He didn't ask what kind of paperwork. He already knew. I drove back to the plaza. The afternoon sun was burning off the last of the rain clouds, casting a sharp golden light over the financial district. I rode the elevator up to my floor, walked past the reception desk, and sat down in my executive chair. I didn't check my email. I didn't look at my consulting files. I just watched the city move beneath my window, waiting. At exactly 2:55 p.m., the elevator doors chimed. My mother walked in first, her face pale and drawn. My father followed, looking 10 years older than he had at Thanksgiving. Owen Brennan brought up the rear, carrying a leather briefcase like it was a shield. Silas was right behind them, carrying nothing but a single, slim manila folder. Nobody spoke. I pointed to the chairs arranged in front of my desk. They sat down. Silas stood by the window watching them. You have no right to do this, Dad said. His voice was hoarse, stripped of all its usual booming authority. That money belongs to this family. That money was stolen by Uncle Elliot, I replied calmly. And then it was wired into my personal account 3 hours ago. Owen flinched. He looked at Silas, who gave a single, confirming nod. You can't keep it, Owen said, though his bureaucratic smugness was entirely gone. It's embezzled capital. We will tie you up in court for the rest of your life. We will freeze every asset you touch. You can try, I said, leaning forward and resting my forearms on the desk. But to do that, you'll have to explain to a federal judge why your star witness, Marcus, forged an IP address and committed wire fraud to access the account first. You'll also have to explain why my father forged a durable power of attorney to take out a fraudulent commercial loan on this building. By the time discovery is over, the 2 male heirs of this family will be in federal prison. The color completely drained from Mom's face. She looked at Dad, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for him to yell and slam his fist on the table like he always did. But Dad just stared at his hands in his lap. He knew he was beaten. What do you want? Owen asked quietly. I looked at Silas. He stepped forward and placed the slim manila folder on the desk in front of Owen. I am dissolving the current family trust, I said. You are going to sign the authorization, Owen, and step down as administrator. In its place, we are establishing a new, irrevocable trust. I am depositing $11,132,000 into it today. Dad's head snapped up. That's not the full 12. No, I agreed. I deducted $800,000 to pay off the fraudulent line of credit you took out against my building, and I deducted $68,000 for my medical settlement, which I am keeping. Mom opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand, silencing her instantly. Here are the new terms, I said, tapping the folder. The new trust will continue to pay out the quarterly dividends to the family. Aunt Claire, Uncle Duncan, the cousins. Everyone gets their money, but I am the sole, irrevocable trustee. The silence in the office was absolute. The weight of what I was saying pressed down on them, suffocating their pride. I manage the investments, I continued, looking directly into my father's eyes. I approve the disbursements. Every single dollar this family spends from the trust will require my signature. If anyone contests my authority, their dividends are permanently revoked. If anyone attempts to sue me or this building, they are cut off completely. Mom started to cry. It wasn't a dramatic, manipulative sob. It was the quiet, terrified crying of a woman who had just realized she had completely lost control of her life. You can't do this to us, Dad whispered. You're our daughter. You made it very clear at Thanksgiving how you view me, I said. The anger that had burned in my chest for decades was gone, replaced by a cold, unshakable peace. You told me I wasn't raised. You told me I was a financial burden you chose not to unload. You cultivated me to be your backup generator. I pushed the contract across the desk toward them. I placed a silver pen on top of it. Congratulations, Dad, I said softly. The primary power failed. I'm running the grid now. Owen didn't hesitate. He picked up the pen, flipped to the back page, and signed his resignation. He slid the the document to my father. Dad stared at the paper. His hands were shaking. He looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows, at the massive commercial space I owned, at the empire he had sworn I would never have. Then, slowly, painfully, he picked up the pen and signed his name. Mom signed right after him, her tears splashing onto the blue ink. They stood up. They didn't say goodbye. They turned and walked out of my office, out of my building, taking the elevator down to the street level, completely at my mercy for the rest of their lives. Silas walked over to the desk, picked up the signed contract, and slid it back into his folder. He looked at me, a rare, genuine smile crossing his face. I'll file this with the court in the morning, and I'll contact Ellis Tate downstairs to let him know the escrow order has been officially vacated. Your rent flow is secure. Thank you, Silas, I said. You earned it, he replied. He gave me a brief nod, turned, and left the office, closing the heavy glass door quietly behind him. I was alone. The sun was beginning to set, turning the sky over the city a brilliant, fiery orange. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the windows. I looked down at the streets below, watching the tiny cars and the people rushing home. I thought about the 12-year-old girl who had cried in a hospital bed, wondering why her pain was such an inconvenience. I thought about the woman who had bought bus passes so her brother could have the world. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened the banking app one last time, and looked at the balance. Then I locked the screen, slipped it back into my pocket, and turned off the lights in my office. Tomorrow, I had leases to review.